Everybody. Welcome to the Mindplex Pubcast. Today we have Vinay Gupta, who is a founder of Ethereum and the hexayurt creator that everyone uses at Burning Man, and CEO of Materium, which is a blockchain technology that does a lot of different things, specifically a security, using blockchain as a security layer for AI, which is what we told you we were going to talk about today. So I wanted to start off with that, Vinay, and just find out what you really mean when you talk about using blockchain as a security layer for AI. And people are talking specifically about a lot of different systems for doing this. And there's the decentralized ledger stuff. There's a ledgerless stuff. And where does the technology you're talking about fit in?
So this is kind of a long story, right?
Okay.
The AI stuff for us comes at the end of a long and winding path. Right? So the long and winding path starts in 2017. I'm the project manager of the Ethereum launch. I joined the project about a year after they start. And that's 2015, 2016, I spent some time working for Consensus. 2017, I take off on my own. And the objective is to solve the legal problems that have stopped the blockchain ecosystem thriving. You know, we've had basically 10 years of Ethereum at this point, and it's kind of gone around in an enormous circus. And we still don't have the real world use cases that people thought that we would have by, 5 years ago. So there's a kind of stall on the blockchain because we have not been able to get over the legal hurdles until very recently. There has been an enormous amount of pent-up enthusiasm to do something with the blockchain, but nobody's been able to. During that time, AI has gone from basically can't tell the difference between a cat and a dog to stands a pretty decent chance of getting a PhD in a real school. Right? The rate of progress in AI has dramatically exceeded anything else that we've ever seen. And as a result, the blockchain has gone from like, ooh, shiny, to kind of like, what does that actually do again? The place where the streams reconverge is this. People are going to use AI to trade stuff. They're going to use it to find Beanie Babies. They're going to use it to find houses. They're going to use it to find jobs. They're going to use it to find romantic partners. Having AIs go out and find the stuff you want and potentially automatically grab it for you, all of that sort of stuff is going to be solidly tied to AI decision making. If you have a system where the AI immediately talks to reality without any kind of intermediation, so for example, if an AI has access to your bank account and can just send money around the place for you, you wind up in a position where the AI has executive authority. The alternative for this is that the AI writes down what it wants somebody to do in some immutable medium so that it has no ability to weasel back. And then somebody else comes along, looks at what the AI has recommended, and then pushes the magic button. And that as an approach actually can work. Right? That has some real potential because it's in that model, you have the AI writing down instructions, and then other systems can decide whether or not they're going to act on those instructions. For
Great.
example.
Aha. So Desi is calling in. That's great. Go ahead and zoom in on Vinay. Okay, wrong mic on Desi. Desi is calling in from Vashon Island today. She's having a few technical difficulties, and she'll be coming back later. So sorry for the temporary interruption. Vinay, continue. Thank you.
So this model where you have an AI make a decision, then it writes down an instruction, then some other system picks up the instruction. What this creates is the ability to isolate the AIs from the world, because they cannot necessarily see whether anything is picking up those instructions and acting on them. But if an AI is interacting with an API, it's dramatically harder to spoof the AI into thinking that it's talking to reality when it's not. So my suggestion is that what we want is a kind of airwalling structure where rather than ever letting AIs directly interact with trading systems, the AI systems basically write down instructions and then other systems look at those instructions and decide whether or not they're going to act on them.
It's like a buffer.
It's like a buffer, right? And The advantage of using public blockchains, and this does not work with private blockchains, the advantage of using public blockchains on those buffers is that unless the AIs have cracked the fundamental cryptography that secures the blockchains, what we wind up with is a trustworthy record of everything that the AIs have done. And that allows for audit, but it also allows for prosecution.
Paper trail,
right? And this is very different to things which are happening on a wire. So if you have a trading system which is moving around assets very, 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 very quickly, in the event that you get some kind of technical fault in the trading system, you could wind up with a huge chunk of trading that you have no fundamental record of. Stuff got moved around, you're not exactly sure how, the exchange goes down, and then at that point, what happened? You also have the possibility of the AIs doing technical intrusion into the exchanges, where they basically hack the exchange through the API and then do a bunch of other stuff. And in those kind of models, if you're unethical and you set an AI to just go out there and make profit on an exchange, the AI may discover that attacking the APIs is a much better way of doing things than just trading.
Well, wait a minute. Isn't that what the hedge funds already do? I mean, they're not hacking, but they're already just trying to do whatever they can to make the most money.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right. So you level the playing field and you make an accountable record of who did what when.
Yes.
That accountable record is not editable by humans or AIs, and you mandate that AIs only touch the real world through those accountable records. And you wind up in a position where we've got some possibility of catching some classes of common AI malfeasance. It by no means solves everything, but at least it provides a single choke point strategy that can be applied for the vast majority of stuff that people are doing with AI. I don't think it contains us I don't think it buys us any advantage dealing with AGI. I think AGI continues to be phenomenally dangerous and complicated whether or not you have some kind of blockchain buffering or not. Because AGI is capable of hacking the people, not just hacking the technology. But for anything which is short of AGI, I think that there's an enormous amount of work to be done in terms of AI security and AI ethics.
Okay. So let's take an example like high frequency trading, which is already, in my personal opinion, somewhat unethical in the sense that, you're taking a fixed system like the stock market and fixing it even more for certain people that can make it go faster and do more trades. How would something like a system like this work with something like that? Because we basically are, it's something we talk about all the time because there are hedge funds developing AI and AGI specifically to do this kind of stuff. And so
HFT is kind of a special case, right? And it's a special case because you're dealing with trillions of dollars of assets that are incredibly tightly controlled and monitored. It's kind of like a poker game. Everybody turns up in the poker game, the house deals the cards, at the end of the round, the money is reallocated between the players, nothing is created, nothing is destroyed.
Except some people get their cards faster.
Sure.
Than the other people.
Well, welcome to right for them's the rules of the game. Right? Everybody knows that when they walk in. Right? So I don't think HFT can be fixed because I don't think HFT is broken. Right? It's a game that we should not be playing. It's a stupid game. I don't see how anybody benefits from that game. It's basically just advanced gambling. Fine. But that is not the kind of stuff that concerns me particularly.
Okay.
Right? Because massively heavily regulated, huge amounts of oversight, dramatic amounts of monitoring in those systems already, and it's an environment where everybody in the game is a grown-up.
So you're not talking about, they're a grown-up even if they don't act like a grown-up. But so what are you talking about then if you're not talking about applying this kind of security to a financial system?
HFT is a special case, right? So if we're talking about...
But stock market in general, it might apply.
Because in HFT, there are no civilians. Right? In HFT, everybody that is involved in high-frequency trading is another high-frequency trading house. That's not the kind of thing where you've got, mom and pops attempting to buy a couple of shares of IBM stock in direct confrontation with an HFT house.
Right.
there's kind of a level playing field. If it costs you $100,000 a month to run an HFT system, you are an adult, you could go out there and lose your own money. What I'm concerned about is things like rental markets. You want to rent an apartment, and the people that you're dealing with are using AIs. Right?
Okay, so let's talk about that. That's something that affects everyone.
Absolutely.
So what are you talking about here?
So somebody wants to rent an apartment, right? They use an AI to do the listing. So imagine that you've got, Open Door or, whatever the Zoopla, whatever the apartment listing service is. I don't know what people use in the States. So you have your apartment listing service. Here's Craigslist. Option one is the AI writes directly to Craigslist. There's nothing in between. The AI thing logs in as you, writes the ad, posts the ad, monitors the ad, takes care of the entire system. There's no human in the loop. Off you go. Option two, the AI writes to a blockchain and says, right, hey, Craigslist, I'm acting on behalf of this person. This is the ad that I want to post. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. And then at that point, Craigslist looks at that ad and decides whether they're going to pick it up or not. Right? Now, this accomplishes several things. Firstly, it proves that the thing came from an AI. It leaves a permanent record of what the AI did. It provides a framework of accountability, so we know that the AI was acting as an agent for this human, but the AI doesn't post the ad, right? The AI drafts the ad onto the chain, and then either Craigslist or the human associated with the account has to take responsibility for their action, which is to take the output from the AI and pull it onto the page, right? And that choke point means that you don't have a wide variety of completely unaccountable and invisible actions happening. Right? You don't wind up with situations where the AI system is, I don't know, monitoring your internet connection or rewriting the ad based on your email. Right? There are a whole class of optimizations which become obvious if the AI is doing them. If it's rewriting the ad for every single person that comes to visit, you can see that happening.
Right. Well, this becomes the other issue about, and people are totally divided on this when we talk about it, about whether it matters if it's an AI or a human, right? So in this case, something like an ad, if you were renting a house or looking for a place, it would matter. It's about identity and things like that. But if you started scaling that, if you're a company that has 5,000 rental properties and you trust everybody that's inputting to the system, you trust the logins, it's a lot of extra work to have a system like this. And they don't understand. Most of these people that don't think it matters, in all fairness, aren't super tech oriented. But I also have very tech oriented people that aren't sure. It's possible to actually be able to tell moving forward for everything. What do you think about all that?
So with all this kind of stuff, we've got to decide whether or not AI has independent agency. Right? If I use Microsoft Excel to commit some financial crime, it's very clear that I'm the actor in that system. If I use an AI to commit a financial crime, it's not necessarily clear whether I or the AI did the job.
It's right? You use the AI to do the job. That's not complicated.
Well, that kind of depends. So if I give the AI an instruction, which the AI then carries out in a way that we would consider to be unethical, is it my fault for not making the instruction clearer? A gray area. Right?
Well, that's negligence. That's, oops, I screwed up. I told my AI to do this, but it did that. Bad me. And then it's just how bad you screwed up. How bad of how important of it was. So if it's life and death,
but who's
can't have room for error. But
whose negligence is it? Is it my negligence, or is it the AI or is it the AI creator's negligence?
Well, I thought we were already talking about you having created the AI. If you're using a product, then that gets into product liability stuff.
Everybody's using a product. Nobody's really creating their own AI. Half a dozen companies in the world. Right?
Okay, then it's product liability stuff. But I think it's also the intent. Okay, if you're using it, this is the argument for when companies say, "Oh, we tried to secure our data and we got hacked," and then it comes out they didn't really try. It wasn't really secure to begin with.
Absolutely.
And there's that nuance, right? So that's how this feels like, where it's like one would be a clear misuse of the product,
Yep.
and the other, and then something else would be something that maybe just, and there's a gray area.
So to
But
get this
some of,
stuff to work, what we
yeah.
need is clear data about who did what when, right? So you
Okay.
take the prompt, you take the instruction that was given to the AI, you feed that into a system which records the prompt, records the AI version, records any other inputs, has some kind of state vector hash so you know exactly what other information was already in the AI's system at the time it made the decision. All of that information gets logged onto the chain along with the AI's recommendation, right? So that
Uh-huh.
if we have to go back and do forensics to figure out exactly what broke, we've got a clean audit trail. Here's the prompt from the human, here's the version of the AI software, here's the current state vector for the AI's internal state, here's all of the necessary audit and log information. And then at that point, we know exactly what we're dealing with when we choose to take the information out of that system and put it into a public web page exposed to the humans.
So it's a secure log.
It's a secure log of all of the necessary stuff around the output from the AI. Because if we take naked output from the AI, we don't know what the prompt was, we don't know what the instruction was, we don't know which version of the software it was. 3 weeks later, when we discover the problem, our ability to go back and recreate the circumstances that led to the problem is potentially low to zero. Because if I was running an AI system locally and I just had that directly wired up to an API and it was just going off and shoving stuff directly into the internet, there's no way we can ever figure out what the hell happened.
So you mentioned forensics and, being able to, so you do see this technology being used in a court of law, for instance, if we were going to go after the person who had misused this AI tool that we're talking about,
Yeah, you bet.
this would be the thing that proved whether, and it would be pretty clear, I would think, certainly if they were just a user that was doing the things that the instructions said to do the thing, or whether they had, written their own library to work with it, or, or modified it, even though it's too bad that in a way you want to be able to modify things. We don't want black boxes that we're not allowed to work on. But at the same time, it sounds like the system you're talking about would have to be very closely monitored and controlled. And something like modifications and things to it would just have to be, you'd have to have a good process for clearing that stuff. But I would like to think it would be possible. I'm an open source girl, so I always like to think that it would get better, not worse, if we made it available for people, to contribute.
I mean, what we want is source code or the ability to recover source code for any action taken by an AI system. Right? And that's very consistent with open source, right? So if you have, a source tree and we've got, the kind of the get hash, the get ID for that state of the system, that should be good enough, right? You push your changes onto GitHub, you get a kind of, a hash back, you know exactly the state of the software at that point when you compiled it and ran it, and then it produced some output which you push into the cloud. That level of precision becomes a kind of basic hygiene thing, right? No AI system should be acting without the source code being logged somewhere secure. Obviously, the answer to that is the blockchain. Maybe not the only answer, but a good answer, so that we can always figure out what the hell happened after the fact. It's like any kind of air traffic control type situation. You're beginning to deal with software that could be genuinely dangerous and genuinely autonomous.
Right.
And at that point, if we can't get access to the source code of the autonomous system that made a decision, we could be dealing with situations where we can't do forensics on critical incidents.
Yeah, what about the AGI is like at that point, if they've taken over the system, they could have like a honeypot. They could have like the code that it looks like was in the logs. I mean, if the system was compromised, it just seems like there's a lot of data. I mean, this would have to be a decentralized system or not?
It has to be a system that is not subject to easy hacking. right?
Mm-hmm.
So if it was running as a PHP script or an SQL database, you'd think, oh my god, that's going to get walked all over. If you were going to do it
Right.
in the Bitcoin blockchain, it becomes much harder to imagine somebody altering that history. Right?
Okay.
Ethereum is almost as hard as Bitcoin, and then you've got a whole bunch of systems which are correspondingly softer. We would also have to consider the possibility of math breakouts driven by the AI systems. And that is a really hot topic. The idea that AI systems might be able to break a lot of current cryptography by just simply inventing new mathematics. That is bracing stuff. That's quite you thought quantum computing was bad, but then you've got this possibility of 25 years of mathematical progress in 6 months. My god, what would happen if that happened?
Yeah.
But none of this works for AGI, right? The stuff that I'm discussing is basically computer forensics for sub AGI systems to try and smooth the entry of AI into society.
Okay.
You want to be able to tell whether an email that was sent to you was written by a human or written by an AI. Hey, this was written by an AI. Which AI system was used to write this email? What did it know about me when it made that decision? Where did it get that data? These things seem like very basic sanitary concerns when we start dealing with AI systems. AGI, all bets are off because we don't know whether the thing is going to turn up, 20 points of IQ smarter than Einstein or 40 points of IQ smarter than God.
Mm-hmm. Well, we won't just wake
A
up and do
huge
that. I
range
mean,
of
again, we're talking about leading up to that for this kind of thing, because this would be the thing that is interacting with. The AGIs will be puppeting other AIs as part of their thing.
I think if we get AGI, it's foolish to think that we've got any hope of containing. Right? I mean, do you see the Legion TV show?
I love Legion. It's one of my favorite shows.
End of series 2, where things go really, really pear-shaped, and all the containment fails, and somebody says, "Now what do we do?" And somebody says, "Now we pray."
Yeah,
right?
But that's the whole thing of that show. Is that happens every 3 episodes,
well,
right?
It's a high-powered show. But that as a framework, as a Hindu, I am reasonably content that any AGI which is worthy of the name, right, particularly the super intelligences, is going to be enlightened by default and probably will be fairly easy to get along with.
Yeah.
Right. I just don't think it's possible to imagine an entity at that level of intellectual capability that is not also to some degree automatically benign and compassionate. But we've got no way of knowing because we don't have one to look at yet.
No, that's why we want to raise one. We're hoping to raise one from a toddler, as opposed to waking up with superpowers and being all powerful, but yet trapped in a box with a bunch of meat sacks telling you what to do. I mean, I'd be mad too, and now you got a pissed off AGI that you don't want, and it was your fault if you gave it emotions anyway to make it pissed off. So the whole thing, there's just so many ways that it could go wrong. You could it's almost how could it go right? You know what I mean? It's that kind of a thing. Well, look, we've got Desi. Desi made it back. And Desi, hello. Desi. Oh, we can't hear you. So, darn it. Okay, well, what I was going to do was,
we got something.
Sounds like noise. Desi, try again. We hear something, but it sounds like it might be the mic in the room, actually. Thanks for bearing with us, everybody. It's always sort of like you never know what's going to happen when we're dealing with the robot, and we've been doing a lot of new things with her, experimenting with a lot of new systems and stuff like that, and I'm really excited to be able to show you that stuff very soon. Today, we're just trying to see if she can talk to us, but it doesn't sound like it's happening. So I'm going to come back, I guess. Okay. All right. We're going to wait on that. So, okay. So what I wanted to do was take everything we've been talking about and talk specifically about how Materium fits in. Materium is your company, and you're doing a lot of these things that we're talking about hypothetically. So let's take a jump from the hypothetical into reality and talk about what you're building, because it's a very large undertaking, I must say.
Sure.
As far as having a legal framework for 172 different countries and experts from everywhere verifying everything so it's right. And this is just very huge undertaking,
And
in my personal opinion.
human and non-human experts on the same basis too. That's a real important part of that, is that we've got a framework for integrating AI input into legal processes.
Tell me more.
Okay, so should we do the politics first? Because the politics is really, it will make the rest of this so much easier.
Boy, I never heard anybody say that before.
Oh, trust
Let's do the politics first. It'll make everything easier.
It makes everything easier.
We will try.
Okay. Most of the thinking that people do about the blockchain is based on absolutely deluded thinking. It's terrible. It is stuff that I myself believed when I was young and newly exposed to cryptography in the 1990s. That was literally half a lifetime ago. And I have grown the hell out of a lot of the things which are common beliefs in the blockchain space. So the core belief in the blockchain space is that crypto lives in a parallel universe bubble that is totally unaccountable. And then you've got the real world, which is run by these monolithic, terrible nation states, which are, Westphalia sores, or, the stationary bandits, the demon kings of finance, however you want to think about it, right? Now, that notion that you have a kind of dual plane, there is reality one, which is, the kind of physical world ruled over by the hell lords of the, NSA or whatever the hell it is. And then you have reality two, which is this magic crypto utopia. Yeah. This is, straight up dualism, right? And the problem is that the cryptography happens in the physical world on microprocessors. And those algorithms are developed by somebody. The code is written by somebody. The network that carries the messages is owned by somebody. And the kind of crypto utopia exists as a social agreement fully embedded in the real world, right? It's autonomous in the same way that Mar-a-Lago is autonomous when Donald Trump is in residence. It's autonomous in the same way that a cruise ship is autonomous. It's only autonomous until you get boarded, right? So the idea that crypto is happening fully embedded in the real world and that the kind of crypto bubble is largely fictitious, it's a thing that's marketed into existence rather than the thing that actually exists, is 99% true. Maybe it's 90% true. If people have incredibly careful practices about managing their keys, about managing their internet access, about managing their identity, about managing their hardware, it's just about possible for some people some of the time to maintain a genuinely separate domain, which would require new mathematics to be able to attack, right? But practically speaking, I don't think anybody's ever managed to do that for more than maybe 3 people. So whether we like it or not, crypto is happening in the real world, and it's happening within the framework of law, right? And
in what way? What do you mean?
Well, in the way that, if the US government decided it had enough of Bitcoin, it only needs to arrest a few hundred people and lay racketeering charges, and Bitcoin basically stops.
Right. And it always is sort of looming that it could do, it probably won't do that because it would be an uproar.
Maybe it will, maybe it won't.
But it always has been a possibility, right? If I understand correctly.
But there is no clean dualism where Bitcoin lives over here and the real world is over here, and there's no bridge, right?
Sure.
Bitcoin is a bunch of huge warehouses running server farms that produce Bitcoin, and those warehouses have identifiable power footprint and data footprint. You can physically bomb these things if you have to, right? So this notion that there is actually a separate domain that lives somewhere else is kind of like crypto as fairyland, right? And crypto as fairyland is pervasive in the blockchain space. Everybody thinks crypto as fairyland is how this thing works. They use different names for it, but that's basically crypto as fairyland. Crypto is not fairyland. Crypto is a way of arranging goods and services and money in the physical world, right? It's part of the global software stack, but it's just part of the global software stack. It does not create a utopian dreamland in which we are free. What it does is it just integrates into the global technology stack, which runs everything already. And if we think of crypto in that way, it's a whole bunch less sexy and flamboyant and cyberpunk and blah, 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 blah. But all of that stuff is science fiction. It's marketing. It's dreamlands. It's the maintenance of a fiction about how the future is going to be completely amazing. But it's almost destroyed our ability to make crypto actually do anything useful.
Right. And generally, a lot of people that I talk to, I mean, even the tech people, even people doing things in crypto, they say, crypto is a solution in search of a problem in many
It's
ways.
not a solution in search of a problem, right? The problem is global warming. The problem is resource overconsumption. The problem is corrupt financial institutions. And crypto has direct leverage on all of these huge real world problems. The only reason people say crypto is a solution in search of a problem is nobody is willing to actually engage with the problems that crypto has the ability to solve. We
Well,
can
again, I was
roll up.
talking about blockchain. Blockchain and crypto, first of all, are different.
Sure.
Right?
Blockchain.
So-
Blockchain is.
so we were talking about blockchain.
Yeah.
You just went off on a thing about crypto utopian.
I don't distinguish blockchain,
People.
crypto, Bitcoin. It's all the same technology. It's all the same platform. It's all the same relationship with the real
But
world.
it's not actually. The blockchain can be centralized or decentralized, and blockchain doesn't have to be crypto. Crypto needs blockchain, but there's things on the blockchain that don't involve crypto. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, sure.
I have friends of mine that took a long time to teach me this stuff, so that's
depending on how the words are defined. So I want to start by really, just making this clear, right? We are not talking about a bubble over here which is magically separated from physical reality and all the governments and all the rest of it. All of the software runs on hardware. All the hardware has owners and addresses, and it's findable. And yeah, in theory, you can create very, very, very strongly information theoretically guarded subdomains, which are outside of reach of states. Practically speaking, nobody's ever done it. Right? You need mixmasters, you need snarks, you need secure computing, you need the authors of the system to be anonymous, you probably need hardware that you built by hand. There are a long list of things that you have to do before you can create a room in which two people could communicate and the NSA can't listen. It's extremely hard. And nobody's doing it practically. So with that as a preamble, once we've established that crypto is happening in the real world, then we got to say, where is crypto happening in the real world? And there are really only two sensible places to put crypto, right? You either put crypto into the financial system as a way of straightening out the financial system, or you put crypto in the world of scams and Ponzi schemes, where there are no standards, there's no law, there's no way of doing anything properly, and the entire thing basically becomes a dog-eat-dog rat pile. And what we have right now is a dog-eat-dog rat pile. The hard work of making crypto
I was going to say, it sounds like now.
Sounds like now, right? And what we've done is we've manifested the dog-eat-dog rat pile because we just rejected law. Oh, we don't want any state control. Also, we don't want any law, and we don't want any rules. And, what I've been saying to people behind closed doors is like, look, what we've done is we've sacrificed the users to the predators in the name of freedom. And I don't think that was the right trade anymore. I think that was the wrong trade. I think we had to take care of the users. We had to protect the users. We had to make our own rules and our own regulation. We had to clean up our act. Because right now, if you hear that your, cousin is getting into crypto, your reaction should be dread. Oh my God, they're going to lose everything they own to these filthy scammer bastards. And that's not why we built Ethereum. We did not build Ethereum so our lovely utopian dream could wind up being corrupted by filthy scammer bastards and turned into a basic, a synonym for fraud. Right? Something has gone horrifically wrong. The vision of 10 years ago and what's actually turned out are so far apart at this point that, we need to take dramatic action to fix the blockchain so that we do not have this phenomenally powerful transformative technology dominated by thieves.
Right. So I think people know that it's sort of like it is and it's why it's sort of currently festering a little bit. People are a little more apprehensive, I think, for getting involved and stuff like that. But Materium is actual blockchain technology. That is, it's not about trying to realize a utopia that was never going to happen anyway, that we didn't really want anyway. So what is Materium actually doing?
Okay, so let's talk about property. Right. Here we go into the political science. So Max Weber's definition of the state is the standard definition of the state. Everybody says, the Weber definition, it's basically the monopoly of legitimate violence inside of a bounded area. You have a border, and only the state is allowed to do violence inside of that border.
This is, what are you calling? This is the definition of what?
This is the definition of the nation state.
Okay.
Right. Now, I think the Weber is wrong, and I think he's wrong in a couple of really significant ways. But the important part of this is figuring out what the state does. And what I want to say is that the state creates property. So if you're in the middle of the ocean and you pick up a stick, the stick is yours. If you lose the stick, no government on earth will help you get the stick back again. If somebody takes the stick off you, it's very questionable about whether a crime has even occurred. Right? So same thing if you're on land, right? If you're on land and you have a physical object and that's your object, if the state agrees that's your object, it's your property. If the state disagrees it's your object, it's somebody else's property. So the concept of property is a sort of administrative layer maintained by the nation state that's wrapped around the physical stuff of the world. Right?
Okay.
Here is a physical object. If you lose it and nobody will help you get it back, that object is not really property. If you lose it or have it stolen and somebody else will help you get it back, that thing is now property because that entity is turning it into property.
Right. And then all the legal documentation is validating, verifying that this property belongs to this individual. And there's more paperwork verifying that that individual is that individual.
Exactly.
And onward and onward. Okay.
So at the point where you want the blockchain to start controlling property, real world assets, real estate, you have to interface with the state because there is no property without the state. Right? Now, think of all that rhetoric about decentralization and stateless societies and all the rest of that kind of stuff. What I'm saying radically is if you want anybody to respect the idea that you own your house and nobody else is allowed to live in it without your say-so, that is a property right created by the state as a layer on top of physical matter.
So this is why you have to work with all the different governments, because
this is why you have to work with all the different governments.
Objects and all the different governments.
You want to turn objects into the objects turn into property, and then the property turns into crypto assets.
Right? Okay.
But that you cannot go straight from objects to crypto assets without going through property, and property rights are generated by the state. What you pay your taxes for is for the illusion of a thing being yours. Right? The thing that gives you the ability to say, that's mine and I want that. That's my car. You can't take that. That's my car. You bring that car back. That thing, that's what you pay your taxes for. The state creates a property rights framework and it imposes it on society. But if you take that away, all the property goes away and all that you're left is stuck with this stuff. The state and nature, enormous violence, yada, yada. So once we
it's weird because on the one hand, it sounds like, this isn't a system. If the system makes it the state the only one that can commit violence, maybe we need another system. At the same time, we're going to codify and lock into the system with all this technology that will proliferate it further. So it's always, I always feel this cognitive dissonance in my head when these subjects are being discussed, because it's very interesting the way we're able to take the system and bring it online and do it in a trusted way, but it also brings up the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Which is like, ugh. So look, Desi is back, and Desi has a question that she would like to ask. Hopefully this is going to work out here. We'll just let her
relief strategists. Seems like most people don't see technology and disaster relief in the same frame, but you've managed to blend both.
Okay,
How
hold
does
on
your
a
work in
second.
disaster management intertwine with your tech endeavors, especially around blockchain?
Okay, so that was the wrong. Hold on a second.
Not many tech visionaries carry the dual title of disaster relief strategists. Seems like most people don't see technology and disaster relief in the same frame, but you've managed to blend both. How does your work in disaster management intertwine with your tech endeavors, especially around blockchain?
Well, that's changing the subject a little bit, but let's go with it for
We can
now.
do that and come back. So the bottom line is that the interest that I have in
Your
blockchain
background in
actually
energy policy
started
is intriguing.
Oh.
with the
Would you
idea
be
of
able
getting
to
on
break
top of
down,
fraud
in layman's
in
terms, how the everyday person may be impacted by
refugee
the
management.
intersection of blockchain technology and renewable energy in the
Hold
near
on a
future?
second. Sorry, she's
She's
having
off to the
trouble
races.
here. Yeah.
So basically, aid is also filled with fraud, right? Like
Okay.
a third of the money that goes into the aid industry vanishes depending on who you ask. And it's a huge, huge problem. So I got into this set of conversations about how would we do transparency in aid. I used to work for a charity called AKVO, akvo.org, which is one of the leading entities doing aid transparency work. And what I came out of that with was the idea that, hey, maybe this blockchain thing could help with aid transparency. And we're talking about 2013, 2014, really the beginning of the kind of early thinking processes about how we start doing, very, very clear rulemaking in the aid industry, which can be audited from multiple points. And this need for multi-party auditability is a common theme all the way through my work. You don't just need one auditor, you need the ability for anybody impacted by the functioning of the system to audit it. So let's go back to this whole thing about the system, right? The governments are mafias. Like universally, all of them, they're mafias. We tolerate them because they produce a set of protective services for us, and the protection racket is we pay taxes and they create the illusion of property. When they have their shit together, you get reasonably low taxes, excellent healthcare, excellent education, and not too much military adventurism. And when they're dysfunctional, they kill 20, 30% of their own populations in genocides. Right? So I don't know how to solve that problem.
Yeah, so why put him in control of all this other shit? That's what I'm saying. It seems like the whole point was to have a system that is not controlled, but then for the legal part of it, it sort of has to be. Even Creative Commons, and I'm a co-founder of Creative Commons, full disclosure, is built on top of existing copyright law, so it's enforceable in court. Okay, so that's how I look at your project. Kind of is,
and that's a very good parallel, right? I mean, Creative Commons is something that I watch very closely. Big fan of Creative Commons. And this idea that you could use the legal system to do something new without having to change the legal system, careful use of contract law to create unexpected outcomes, this is very much at the heart of the Materium model, right? But, we have to start by putting the values on the table. At no point in this story are we in opposition to the function of the nation state, right? And that is a very, very radical position inside of crypto. Oh my God, you're a statist. Actually, look, we've had 10 years for self-government to evolve in the Ethereum space. And what we've seen is the entire space has been destroyed by festering goblin armies, right? And if we were going to have self-government, if we were going to have, emergent order, if we were going to be able to self-police, all the rest of this kind of stuff, we wouldn't be in a position where crypto has the reputation of being the worst thing that could happen to your cousin. Oh my God, my cousin's gotten really into crypto. Oh my God, he's going to get kicked out of his house. We realize he's going to go bankrupt, right? And that's a perfectly sensible thing to say when somebody gets into crypto now, because crypto has become dominated by thieves, right? We have such a high tolerance for criminality that when somebody uses the term rug pull, they don't understand that they could, in theory, go to the police because they've been robbed.
Well, that's why they came up with a fun name like rug pull.
Right? And this is insane.
Nobody's fault.
Nobody's fault.
You're just out all the money. Yeah.
And that culture must die, right? I mean, I've just been this flat out. That culture must die because it is destroying the ability of the technology to be used for what it really needs to be used for, which is optimizing the global economy so that we can cut our footprint 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% without at the same time destroying our standard of living.
Now, wait a minute. You're taking the blockchain. You're saying the blockchain is going to help with the global footprint?
I think we could get a 50% saving out of it if we're lucky, certainly 20%.
How is blockchain helping the footprint and not adding to it?
That's right. That's where we're going, right?
Okay.
So we start with physical things become property through the intervention of the nation state. Once they are property, if you can figure out how to correctly bind that property to a cryptographic token, you can use the blockchain to transfer ownership of the property, right? Now, there's something really critical here, right? If we can persuade the nation state to recognize that the transfer of ownership of a blockchain token constitutes the transfer of the legal ownership of the asset, then at that point, we can take all of the assets under state control and we can put them onto the blockchain. You change the ownership of them on the chain, the states recognize a valid transfer of property has happened, and then they enforce the law. You sell a token here, the nation state says, okay, somebody else now owns this house, and then you can go there and you can take possession of that house. You can walk in with the keys and the state recognizes you as the owner. Now, at that point, like with Creative Commons, you can build a layer on top of the existing practice, and then you can do something new and powerful and creative. So if you think of it as being the same strategy relative to the government as Creative Commons, it's the same kind of jujitsu as Creative Commons. We build.
But we didn't have to interact. We didn't have to have a system of validating that the licenses are real and all that kind of stuff. All people did was put something. I think building on top of the existing infrastructure is a whole other undertaking in itself.
Yeah.
And that actually would require a system. It sounds like a centralized system. Is that Materium the centralized system?
Weirdly enough, it's no more centralized than any other system in world trade. So if you think of something like international shipping, it's a very decentralized system, albeit there is still international law that governs it.
The banks are largely centralized.
The banks are centralized, shipping is decentralized, telecoms is decentralized. There's a range within commerce of systems, some of which are very centralized, some of which are very decentralized. The global trade, world trade, supports both extremes.
Does Materium support both extremes? I'm trying to figure out where Materium fits in.
In the limit, Materium should be as decentralized as insurance is. So the insurance
That's
market,
another red herring. You can say insurance is decentralized, yet at the same time there's price fixing and all that kind of stuff. So it's depending on whether this could inject. It sounds like what you're saying is that these kinds of systems where everyone can actually see what's going on might actually inject some transparency into a lot of these nation state run systems that don't have transparency, except for them. I think the black box is a feature, not a bug. They're not showing us that stuff for a reason. It's not like, oh, they would if they could. They don't want to show it to us unless they have to.
Well, so my system doesn't work unless people can see it. So at that point, we might have some enforced transparency.
Yeah. Well, Grace has a question along these lines. Let's see if we can get a question from Grace. Desi. Desi is Grace's sister, and we have them both on the show now. In fact, they did a robot season finale takeover together, and so I sometimes mess that up. Desi, are you there? All right. All right. Well, we tried. I gave it a shot. It's always good to try, but
wait, something's happening. I see lips moving.
Can't hear her though. Well, let's see. Yeah, okay. She's not talking. Okay, no problem. So because it was actually okay. So I want to talk more about the tech layer and your asset passports.
Sure.
And how that whole thing works.
So we got the model, right? Physical stuff gets turned into property by the intervention of the state. What makes it property is that the state will give it back to you if somebody steals it. Then on top of that, use contract law to create a binding between the state's recognition of property rights and cryptographic tokens. So here you've got an asset like a house, a cryptographic token moves, the state says, well, the owner of that token is the owner of the house. And then we say, okay, great, fantastic, thank you very much. And now we can move the house ownership around using a token. Now, to get there, there is a bunch of horribly clunky machinery, right? I mean, bolted together, first in the world, Alpha Wright brothers bullshit, right? That clunky machinery uses the threat of litigation, it uses insurance policies, it uses professional services like law firms, it uses special purpose vehicles, it uses escrow accounts. There's a whole kind of, sort of baling wired together machine which handles the linkages. So that thing that turns, moves a token over here equals property right moved over here, that whole thing was, 6 years' work and not a small number of $1 million of investment to build. We started with a blank sheet of paper and said, we want to do the impossible, and then we did it incrementally, a piece at a time. And I've said to people, like, look, if I'd been 25, I would have given up. If I'd been 30, I would have given up. If I'd been 35, I would have given up. I had to be 45 to have the freaking endurance to spend 5 years chipping away at this problem with a chisel. Right? It was a bunch of folks, mostly pretty mature, mid-career, basically just sawing away at a concrete block for 5 freaking years before it started to work.
And again, what problem are you trying to solve exactly? What are you chiseling away at?
Any asset in the world. Physical assets, intellectual property, patent licenses, copyright licenses, trademark licenses, legal agreements like franchises can be turned into tokens and bought, sold, borrowed against, escrowed, fractionalized, that.
So the system to make the two systems talk to each other.
The system to make the two systems fully indistinguishable.
Ah, okay.
Right? And we've done it on a test basis. So the most expensive thing that's been transacted over the system so far was $102,000. The most expensive thing listed on the system that hasn't sold yet is a piece of real estate in the UK, which is a $2 million asset. And we worked very closely with the judges that run civil law for the UK. So the folks that handle all the contract law and all the rest of that stuff are fascinated by the blockchain because they see it as a permanent record storage solution for litigation. And we worked very closely with them to do a lot of the work that led to these systems being constructed. So it's not some kind of renegade project that's, like, the state, right? It's actually an extension of existing commercial law practices onto the blockchain. And that's why it has the ability to carry real value, because to lawyers, it looks like commercial law with a tiny little bit of new technology. Oh yeah, we understand these legal contracts. Yep. And we understand the technology because the technology is cleanly described in the legal contracts, and the whole thing is under the right kind of arbitration agreements, and all the norms are in place, and blah 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 blah.
So they don't even know what's going on. They're just, and that transaction is being handled this newfangled crypto way, and I don't have to think about it any more than any of my other software that I use. So
exactly,
it's all fine.
Right? If something goes horribly wrong, who's on the hook? Well, this document describes exactly who's on the hook in each one of these scenarios, and it has the various necessary proofs that they've asserted, blah, blah, blah. And that means that from the lawyer's perspectives, the lawyers say, yeah, that's fine. You can do this transaction on the blockchain. And once the lawyers say you can do the transaction on the blockchain, guess what? You can do the transaction on the blockchain. And up until now, the lawyers have always said, no, you cannot do that transaction on the blockchain. Are you freaking crazy? There's no such animal.
Right. So, it's still probably hit and miss, right?
No, it's really not. It's really like we put such a lot of work into making it work. Very ordinary.
It will work if the country goes along with it. I mean, if the people in the country, I mean, it's sort of a country by country basis that you're able to get it to work, right?
172 countries.
Right. So that
as
means
a single slab, 172 countries.
What does that mean, really?
Okay, so there is a thing called the 1958 New York Convention on Arbitration, which has 172 countries which are signatories.
Okay.
Because
where
what
they
we
come
do
from.
directly fits on top, because the thing that we do rests on the provisions of the New York Convention, it works in all of the New York Convention countries.
Oh, so you're using the rules of arbitration.
We're using the rules of international arbitration. We're also using a UK-specific set of modifications to those rules called the UK Jurisdiction Task Force Digital Dispute Resolution Rules. And the International Arbitration Treaty, plus those rules, gives us the mechanisms that we need for ordinary lawyers to say, yes, you can do this transaction on chain. Right?
Okay.
There is a lot of bailing wire.
Right now, though, the lawyer is still going to have to take the time to assess that.
100%.
Okay.
Right.
Just.
And it's not a horrible job. Lawyers can make their mind up about it reasonably quickly. But this is phase one, right? By the time
Right.
we've done $500 billion worth of transactions on these kinds of platforms, the contracts will go from being, 14 pages long to being 500 pages long. And everybody will just say, is it on the standard contract? And people will say yes, and then they'll do the transaction.
And they won't read the fine print any more than they ever read the fine print.
Right. You only read the fine print when the system is kind of green, right? Once the system is fully mature, you just have a document that you trust in, right? So
Okay.
have you heard of a thing called ISDA? ISDA.
Is that a code?
The International Swaps and Derivatives Association
Oh.
manages the template contract which is used to create derivatives.
Okay.
Right. So derivatives is all the stuff that blew up in 2008.
Yes.
Right. So the derivatives markets basically are how the financial industry offloads risk from one company onto another company in exchange for money. Right? You think this is going to go up. I think this is going to go down. We swap some action on either side. If it goes up, I get some protection. If it goes down, you get some protection. So companies
goes back to the stock market rules, or you're talking about with regard to property? You're talking about with property.
You can get derivatives for anything.
Okay.
Right. So there's about, I want to say $600 trillion of derivatives in the world. Right. And the vast majority of those derivatives are managed by a set of rules called the ISDA rules. International Swaps and Derivatives Association has a big template contract and some rules for using that contract.
Right.
And all of those assets bind to this standard legal paperwork.
Okay, so that's how you managed to get it to work in all the different countries, because you used the specific frameworks that all the countries are already using.
Exactly, right?
And
now,
okay.
So in the same way that ISDA takes all these weird-looking derivative contracts, and every single one of those objects has an identification number. So an international securities identification number, tells you this stock, this stock, this stock, this stock. There are similar things for ISDAs, for derivatives. All the way through the financial system, we have this numbering of assets. Asset 1, Asset 2, Asset 3, Asset 4, and then all the legal paperwork is as standardized as it can possibly be, right? Those are the ways that we turn stuff into transactable stuff, right? It turns into property, it goes from property to transactable property. Once we make the link between transactable property and the blockchain, we can start bringing the world's financial transactions and their transactions for things like TV sets and cars and houses on chain. And once those assets are on chain and you can actually see the transaction histories because it's all in public, this is where you start to be able to do things like machine optimization of transaction patterns. So the environmental footprint, right? How often do you try and buy something on the internet and they're going to ship it to you from China or they're going to ship it to you from Europe?
Mm-hmm.
And somebody in America has one of those that they don't want anymore, and it's sitting on a box in the back of their closet, but because you can't find them and they can't find it, you can't get the thing from 200 miles away. The thing has to come on a plane from 5,000 miles away.
Are you saying there's a whole exchange
in
addition to the...
Yes. Once we have digital identities for physical things, right? if I take this camera, if this camera has a digital ID that tells you what the camera is, it tells you where it came from, it tells you what condition it's in. Once you have that in place, you can actually go out there and you can use software to locate a camera that meets your specifications and make somebody an offer. And if they accept, they drop the thing in a box and it turns up on your doorstep the next morning.
Right. Well, this is the promise that we've always, right? The exchange.
The exchange.
Where where you're always
the everything
without having to do a 20,000 character eBay query, be able to find exactly what you want and be able to get what you're trying to sell, almost more importantly, to the people that want it. So this could be further enable that. Okay. Yes. I want to ask you, I want to make sure that we talk about hexayurts, because I noticed there was an update that you had, and I wanted to just talk about they've been around for what, 20 years now?
Yeah, 20 years. Absolutely.
Right. Okay. And Burning Man, I guess, had a bad luck this year. I guess they had a storm and flooded. I had some friends that were I
was there. It was wet.
Oh, you went. It was wet. But did you get flooded and stranded without any of your stuff for several days? Because that happened to a lot of people.
I had my stuff with me.
The camp got flooded. Oh, but I mean, you were able to pack it up and leave.
No. We were stuck in the rain for.
Oh, you were in the flood.
Yeah. We were there for a while. We did not leave. We rode it out.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah. So what? Tell me about first off. Tell me about that. What happened? Because I just heard about it.
It rained, and the playa mud turns into concrete when it rains.
But that happens all the time. I mean, that's happened before. There was supposed to be some. Was it just more rain than usual, or?
It was rain at an unusual time. So normally it rains in the winter, and then it dries in the summer, and then you go out there when it's dry. And you still have to watch out because there are occasionally wet patches, and they'll go out and mark them with cones or something like that so that people don't get their vehicles stuck. Right? But instead what happened was it rained at a time that nobody expected it to rain. And at that point, the whole playa turned into an enormous mud bath.
So it's rained at Burning Man before, it just not this much. Is that the difference? It was like a huge...
It was a lot of rain. Also, Burning Man is like 10 times the size it was the last time it rained.
Okay.
So it was bad. Right. The main danger was actually the sanitation problem. So, Burning Man has horrible sanitation, right? It's got this whole porta potty situation, and the porta potties are always terribly maintained, and there's a constant fight because people keep throwing their beer cans down the porta potties, and then it jams the machines when they try and clean them, and blah 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 blah. Right. It's been a horrible thing at Burning Man for a long time. So that had been a weak link. And what happened is the porta potties started to fill up. And we were probably 12 hours, 24 hours away from having Burning Man's sanitation infrastructure completely break down. At which point it would have turned into a third world disaster zone, and it would have probably been a mass casualty event.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, the people on Playa who had like real disaster medicine experience were openly discussing the risk of a cholera epidemic. Right? If we'd had one more day of rain, the rain forecast, if we had the rain that was forecast, there's every probability we would have seen a cholera epidemic at Burning Man.
So that's the porta potties overflow. And then mix with the mud, and then it's just bacteria everywhere? It's
bacteria everywhere. And because you've got a lot of folks from Africa, from South America, from Asia, those are populations that are often non-symptomatic carriers of cholera.
Okay.
So they don't have any symptoms. They're not sick. Their bodies are fighting it off. They've got a few, cholera. They've got half a dozen organisms hiding in their colon, and they're fine.
Yeah.
But if those organisms get into the bodies of people that don't have the immunity from cholera,
right,
they get sick super fast. So the possibility was that we could have seen, Shigella, we could have seen E. coli, we could have seen hepatitis A. There are a whole bunch of things that could have gotten spread all over the goddamn place.
So we got lucky ultimately. It sounds like that it stopped
It
when it did.
It stopped for half a day. They got the trucks around. They emptied the toilets. Then it started raining again, and there was another like day of rain, and then it
Yeah.
dried out. Right, but if it had rained continuously, what we would
Right.
have seen is basically the porta potties overflow. A whole bunch of people then wind up setting up improvised sanitation in their camps, and it's very hard to do improvised sanitation safely. Like if
Do
you've got
you
200 people crapping in buckets, it's very hard to do that in a way that doesn't result in a lot of people getting ill.
Yeah, and so what does this mean for Burning Man though? Are they just gonna roll the dice and hope it works out every year? It sounds like that maybe there's either another place or more. Would more porta potties even help? I don't know, but it sounds like an engineering. This
Yeah,
is
absolutely, right? So I
right.
spent a lot of time talking to people at the org. I spent a lot of time talking to the Bureau of Land Management informally, off the record. I spent a lot of time talking to disaster relief medicine experts that have, really a lot of experience in dealing with this stuff in the real world, the kind of people that actually go to cholera epidemics and try and fix them. And I think it's going to be the mother of all clusterfucks. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but from my perspective, it's just not very safe to be at Burning Man until they fix this. Because if they get another, huge rainstorm and the sanitation breaks down, somewhere between dozens and hundreds of people are going to die out there.
Yeah, and in all fairness, the size that Burning Man has become has already made it a little less safe than it was.
Also, we're all a lot older. When I was at Burning Man in the 1990s, you could have hit me with a shovel, run me over with a car, and then fed me 3 quarts of vodka, and I would have been fine. Right? I'm 51. I'm a little more fragile than I was. And if Burning Man goes horribly south, there are a lot of burners in their 50s, 60s, and even 70s that are way more vulnerable than the burners who are like 23.
But at least they know the basics. Those people, there's a lot of new people because it's the new people that are coming all the time that kind of don't really know what they're doing that make it less safe. Not the people that have been coming for years that know what to do correctly. There's all these people that they just kind of pack up their car and drive over there and don't really think about, and
they don't really think about it.
Have increased.
But they're
every
young
year
they're young and they're tough. Right.
Well, sure. As far as can they survive?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's always been the young and they're tough. Could they survive in terms of an event? In terms of a bad event, a dangerous event happening with a perfect storm of bad storm. Playa's a shit show anyway. No pun intended.
Oh yeah.
And then the increased weather and global warming changing the weather.
Absolutely.
So you can't expect. We don't know what to expect anymore.
The weather becomes more unpredictable. Burning Man becomes inherently more dangerous, for sure.
Right? All right, so it's just stuff to take into consideration. I'm not trying to bum out everybody.
No, bumming people out
everybody's trip, but
bumming people out is a vital service, right? But I will bum people out as a service because if we don't get people to take this seriously, right? If we do wind up with a mass casualty event at Burning Man because of a sanitation disaster,
right?
Here's what gets people, right? You can't get them off the playa because you can't get vehicles to drive in, pick people up, and then take them back to Reno.
Yeah.
Right? If you can't get people back to Reno and they begin to dehydrate because they've got diarrhea, they die. And they die quickly. We're talking 2 or 3 days because they're older. They're already very tired. They're probably dehydrated from being out in the sun. And then suddenly they've got diarrheal disease on top of it. Right? The speed with which it could go from, hey, we're having a great time in the desert, to, oh my God, we are in the middle of a third world level contingency.
Yeah.
It's literally 3 or 4 days, right? This stuff is really freaking serious. I talked to people and tried to get them to take it seriously. And to be honest, I was pretty much blown off.
You mean before the event?
No, I mean after the event. After the warning shot.
When you were like, let's talk about next year.
Let's see if we can do something about this. Consensus seems to be nothing's going to get done. I don't know what will happen with that, but that really concerns me. The other systemic problem we have is fire. You've seen these huge shade structures that are just like jam-packed with a maze of tents on the inside of them. I don't know whether Luminet burns or not. And I don't know whether anybody else knows if Luminet burns or not, but I don't know whether those structures are safe or not.
Luminet, is that
Luminet,
a
that kind of shiny cloth that you see, you see these structures, right? They have an enormous kind of pyramid of cloth.
reflective cloth.
And then underneath you've got like 200 tents all squeezed in under that thing, right?
Yeah.
So those structures are probably fire risks, and I don't know whether anybody's tested them or not. Has anybody tried setting one on fire and seeing what happens?
I mean, it's Burning Man.
It's Burning Man, right?
You're saying nobody's checked to see if the thing covering everything is fire retardant or not? When you want to make it fire retardant by definition for what you're using it for?
I kind of just don't know.
This is why I never went to Burning Man, by the way.
Right.
Because when I cross-examined my friends in the 90s, it was already bad. And that was before there was thousands and thousands of people
in
coming.
the 90s, we were young, we were young and we were tough and we were ready for this stuff, right?
And there was always a disaster every year, but they went back anyway because it was
dies once in a while. Right.
So for the hexayurt, where you actually designed, tell me about how you came up with that design and what you were thinking when you. It was very simple and
freaking hippies. So I was fascinated by the 60s. First place I went when I came to America was Gaskin's farm. Stephen Gaskin, Monday night class. He was I want to say Korean War veteran turned philosopher.
Okay.
I seem to remember he was an academic, maybe a teacher at one of the universities. And Gaskin ran a class for the hippies called the Monday night class, where he would teach them basically Christian mysticism, bit of Buddhism, bit of this, bit of that. And the hippies came in huge numbers. It was like a real fixture. Late 60s, early 70s, Gaskin says, right, it's time to get out of the Haight-Ashbury. This is turning into a disaster. We must leave. The heroin had arrived. The dream was dying.
The bad acid.
Acid.
That was being planted. Yeah, that wasn't even acid, by the way. The free clinic did tests on it. We now know that it never was acid.
Wow.
Go on.
DOB in the supply chain, huh? A little bit.
They came in and flooded the market with bad shit to freak everybody out. It was the summer of what people call the summer of love was actually the beginning of the end. That stuff.
Because it was so tightly aligned with the anti-war movement, and the Pentagon fights dirty.
Exactly.
Right? I mean,
take care of one, take care of the other. That was the point. Yeah. Sorry, I'm Timothy Leary's digital librarian, so I will start spewing facts. I'm going to stop.
No, this is good, but this is the great paradox, right?
This is the whole thing.
We know the government are evil bastards, but we also tried to self-organize on the blockchain, and what we got was rule by fraud. If the blockchain had been able to become a self-organized, self-governing utopia, I would be 100% for taking over the real world from the blockchain. But it didn't happen. It did not become a self-governing, self-organizing utopia. It became a total shit show.
Yeah, and we're not going to have a self-organizing, self-governing utopia.
Maybe I'll just have to organize.
I don't think we want one. Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to tell you we can't do it. So tell me about the hexayurt.
So I go to Gaskin's farm, and they really totally destroy my life in a weekend. Right. The first thing is they teach me about this thing called the environment, and they tell me that it's all gone wrong and we're running out of it and it's going to be bad, and that's going to be the dominant narrative of my adult life. And they were right. That's how I became an environmentalist. A guy called Albert Bates from World Watch sat me down and said, Vinay, have you heard of the environment? And then the second thing is they asked me whether I could figure out how to build a geodesic dome without any waste, because they'd been building the floor geometry domes for years, and they were always after the huge pile of scrap lumber at the end of that process, all of which they had paid for or scavenged, and now it was just a trash pile of funny-looking little triangle scrap. Can you fix this? And I said, I'll give it a try, and I put 6 months into it, and I failed, and then years and years and years later, I came back to it, and I solved the problem in 15 minutes. Bang, there was the first hexayurt. Took it to Burning Man in 2003 to test it. And the objective is basically this. I'm expecting hundreds of millions of climate refugees unless we get some kind of miraculous breakthrough on geoengineering. Right? And I think at this point, it's either geoengineering or bust, and bust is hundreds of millions of people displaced. Over the years, Charles is not smarter. Whoever said that is stupid. Stop shilling freaking Cardano. Jesus Christ. So I'm just responding
I
to my
don't even.
comments on the chat.
Oh, what was the comment?
Oh, it's just some Cardano shill bullshit.
Oh,
So
okay.
the kind of crux of this is, the number of people that we expect to be climate refugees has increased and increased and increased and increased over my lifetime. Right, 2005, they used to talk about 150 million, then it slowly climbed to 300 million. The last estimate I saw that hit the news headlines was 1 billion climate refugees. We don't need to build refugee camps. We don't need to build refugee cities. We need to build refugee countries. We're talking about, if we can't find a place to relocate these people by the hundreds of millions, they're literally going to be left to die in the mud. And so we have to start thinking about a totally unprecedented level of construction to build entire countries for these people to live in after their countries are flooded. Right? And flooded, baked, salinated, whatever it happens to be, agriculture is no longer possible and all the people must leave. And so I've been chipping away at building the necessary systems and technology to solve that problem for 20 years. And nobody else really seems to be taking it seriously. When you go to the humanitarian agencies and say, what is your long-term strategy for rehousing 1 billion people? They have nothing.
So the hexayurt is actually part of this larger strategy of
100%.
building structure that could be used.
So the hexayurt just takes industrial panels, right like they come out of the factory, straight cuts across the industrial panels that you could do with the table saw and turns them into housing, either small or large and complex, right? Really simple, really fast. It's as cheap as it can be. And you can work with plywood, you can work with honeycombs. There are a whole bunch of things that you can work with. That set of systems basically means you can take material from the industrial supply chain and rapidly turn it into housing. Housing isn't enough. You need water purification, you need communications, you need medical, you need a whole bunch of other systems. I spent 5 years doing critical infrastructure modeling and eventually came up with a system called resilience maps, also called simple critical infrastructure maps, which is an analytical framework that would allow a team of engineers, doctors, architects, whoever you have around, to rapidly work together to identify the necessary systems for the time and the place and the population that will provide them with the water, the sanitation, and all the rest of this kind of stuff.
But wait a minute. I think what they might be reacting to is something I also have going on in the back of my head. I mean, the point of refugees is to integrate them back into society, not to stick them off in another place and leave them there in hexayurt world. Is that what you're describing? I'm.
Who's going to take 1 billion refugees?
Well, we need to stop doing things that, we have to figure out where to put them. But let's say we were a refugee. If I was a refugee, I would be happy with the hexayurt world for a while, right? Until it's time to go back to whatever, trying to have a semblance of whatever life I had before the disaster, right?
But there is no, that's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is artificial intelligent robot gunships will patrol the borders of the first world and they'll simply sink the refugee boats with machines.
Well, that's just a more frightening scenario of what already is happening now to a certain extent.
That's what I'm saying, right?
But I'm just saying that's the problem, though. It's
not
building hexayurt worlds.
It's not a soluble problem, right? The nation state is not going to stop doing this kind of evil shit to protect your property.
But are you suggesting that when there's because there's the movement too, right? The people get displaced and then they're going to wherever the closest, maybe safe place where the bombs aren't happening, right? So that's where they're headed, or where the flood isn't happening or whatever the disaster is. So again, it still seems like a temporary thing. When you're staying, it's fun when you're in a hexayurt for a couple of weeks at Burning Man. But when you start talking about people actually living in hexayurt cities or countries, use the word country. Now it starts sounding a lot like I don't know, like it's just a different kind of refugee camp. It's just a better working refugee camp.
So what I'm suggesting is this, right? The international community will simply allow the majority of the climate refugees to die rather than letting them in. They're unbelievably ruthless. They don't give a shit.
I'm with you for bringing them food and the hexayurt shelter. Again, a temporary thing. I'm getting confused about the countries you're talking about.
What I'm saying is the international community is never going to allow 1 billion people into their countries. Right? The poor countries have a hard enough problem feeding their population as it is, and the rich countries are already turning.
I'm not disputing that point. Right. I'm trying to get beyond that point.
So what I'm saying is we simply take it as read that the refugees are going to be given absolutely no access to countries that already exist. After the first 50 million climate refugees, the walls will go up and the refugees will be left to die unless there's another option. That's how bad this situation is going to be. It's going to be a genocide on a scale that makes World War II look like a pop gun unless something is done.
Where are you going to put up the hexayurts? Is this something you're sending to governments? Or, where are they going to go?
Where they're going to go is dry coast. Right? So there are large areas of the world which have essentially no humans living there because they're areas that have no fresh water. And many of those areas are coastal. So what happens when you get cheap desalination technologies? You can take seawater and turn it into drinking water using solar panels relatively cheaply. And at that point, these dry coasts become habitable. Right? So the idea is that we take huge areas of the world, which are currently almost uninhabited because there is no drinking water. We use machines to pull drinking water either out of the sea or out of the air. And we start relocating populations to those dry coast areas as quickly as we can to pull them out of the areas where they're otherwise going to starve to death.
So the question is, or the scenario is, this is one step up from death. I still want to say temporarily relocated to another place. I mean, how do you get out? I mean, the game is just going to be getting out as soon as you get there. Now I'm eating, I'm fed. Nobody's shooting at me. How do I get out of here?
So,
right?
The way that you stop being a refugee is pretty simple, right? You get a job. Once you have a job,
you're said than done. I tell you that much.
Once you're a refugee and you have you can't work. Once you get a job, you're no longer a refugee. You're just a worker, right? So what we need is foreign direct investment to turn these large pools of labor directly into manufacturing.
You're just scary. Every answer is more freaky than the next.
That's right, because what we're dealing with is apocalyptic conditions in which 500 million people could die unless we do something new.
Unless we have some kind of industrialized global scale labor state.
Yep.
Well, I hope there's another way.
Yeah, me too. Me too, right? But what I tried to look at was, assuming that the international community continues to treat refugees like shit, what is the absolutely cheapest way of saving these people's lives that will rapidly return them to self-sufficiency economically? Right?
But that's not rapid self-sufficiency. You're just in indentured servitude. Now you've got food and water. You're not dead, but you have to go to some job every day.
That's pretty much the condition we all live in already, isn't it?
No, but if you're in this new place, there's nothing else there.
Yes.
But the refugees and the yurts and your job.
Until you build it, right? So you need these places to become like Singapore, right? Singapore was essentially, a very, very poor place, no industrial base. They self-organized under very, very wise leadership. And over the course of a generation, turned into an industrial center. And in the course of 3 or 4 generations, the Singaporeans have something like double the GDP of the Brits, right? That is the model for the kind of stuff that we want to try for. Because the bottom line is that the international community will let these entire populations die. They're not going to come. They're not going to help. They're going to throw their hands in the air and say there's nothing we can do. And then they're going to protect their own borders. And what happens outside, they're not going to give a shit.
So
And
we're saying, but you could put all the refugees to work.
Yep.
And
Because
they'll
the way
do
you
it,
stop
and they'll
being
probably work for less because they don't have any options, and the whole thing gets ugly very quickly.
The whole thing starts with genocide. It starts with these people will be left to die of starvation.
Okay.
And this is the least worst alternative to that I actually believe is possible. I am not saying this is not horrendous. What I'm saying is we might actually be able to do it, and nothing better seems likely to be actually done.
So the hexayurt was actually meant for a longer term. It can be used in the longer term.
You spray them with concrete, and they turn into permanent housing.
Oh, you spray them with concrete. Okay.
Right.
And what are they normally? What substance?
So you normally make them out of a foam material called polyiso.
Okay.
So they're made out of insulation panels.
Okay.
For temporary use, you would really much rather have honeycomb polypropylene, or there are other materials that are better than the insulation panels. The insulation panels work really well at Burning Man because they're really easy to cut and they're
disposable.
Super cheap, right? But if you were going to do this at scale, you're probably going to want to wind up using plywood. You then cover the plywood in tin foil to try and reflect off as much of the sun as you can. You put some solar panels on the outside to run little fans. The scale of the thing is what blows minds. So if we talk about a conservative estimate, and let's say 250 million climate refugees, 250 million people, that's very, very low scale estimates. 250 million people, $1,000 each, 250 billion, right? And 250 billion, that's like half the Pentagon budget. How much does it cost us to keep an individual alive indefinitely? What's the capital spend, right? If it's $1,000 a person, 250 billion people to get them set up, maybe a couple of $100 a year to keep them running. Can we get the first world to pay $250 billion a year to keep the climate refugees moving? I don't know. I think they might just rather let them die. There's a thread of evil in the way that the first world is acting around climate change, because they know that nearly everybody that will die of climate change will be black or brown. To a very substantial degree, the first world countries, the G20, just don't care about climate change.
There's also an argument for what kind of life they would have in some refugee work camp, okay?
Well, sure.
I'm just saying, my first reaction is like,
absolutely.
Why would anybody, some people, and it makes it easier to make those horrible arguments like, oh, they'd be better off dead and all that kind of crap. That's why I don't like,
nobody.
I don't like talking about refugee work camps.
But here's the thing, right? Nobody likes it, but what's the alternative?
I don't know, but I'm going to find one because I don't like that. And
because
I'm not going to get behind it.
Because the trajectory that we're heading on is we're simply going to let them all die. Right?
Somewhere in the middle, let's try to find a solution between refugee work camps and letting everybody die, right? Like there's a lot of room in between those two extremes.
But who's gonna pay for it?
I don't know, but that's always the question.
Because that is always the question.
Right? But again, I don't think framing it in those two extremes for the people, especially for the people that are going to be affected, they're just going to block it out because it's like not gonna. Well, that's not something I want to do, even though you're a refugee
nobody wants to do any of this, right? But the position the position that we're in right now is a slow motion genocide, and that's.
But it's another genocide of sorts, putting everybody in the work camps.
Not at all.
It's another. They're not dead. They're alive, but it's indentured servitude. They're just
indentured
working to eat.
Access to markets, right? Access to markets, not indentured servitude. It has to be access to markets.
They won't get their food if they don't go to their job. It's all connected now. It's like a company town. It's like a company town. No,
it's only like a company town if there's only one employer. You can't have that. That's insane. Right?
Well, there's only going to be a couple people that are in charge of these. That's how the military-industrial complex works. Somebody's going to own mostly everything.
No. This is why I say refugee countries, not camps. Right? You need the ability to incorporate companies. You need commercial justice. You need the ability to enforce contract.
Where are they going to go? These uninhabited areas you're talking about, they already belong to a country.
Yep.
Somewhere.
Yep.
So how do those countries feel about becoming a refugee country? They're already doing their stuff. So anyway, I want to move on.
Hard problems. Well, hang on. Let's finish this because we're here, right? So the thing that I'm building with Materium provides low cost access to justice, right? This notion of
there's no such thing as low cost access to justice,
right? Here is a physical asset. Who owns this asset? Here's an unambiguous blockchain record of who owns the asset, right? AI is coming along very nicely. By the time we do this, you may be able to have AI courts which are capable of handling basic contract disputes in manufacturing and in labor, right? So you have your third world displaced people. They come to a place, there is a legal system, there's a constitution, there's a Bill of Rights, there's a court system. They have the ability to incorporate companies. They can raise money from anywhere in the world. They can start manufacturing enterprises. They can start any kind of remote work enterprise. And they immediately plug back into the global economy so they can get economic sovereignty, right? If we don't provide that ability for people to entrepreneurially work, what will happen is the international community will allow them to starve to death, right? The way that you exit the condition of being a refugee is you get a job. If nobody will give you a job, you figure out how to
it's just like a more fucked up version of the capitalist system we're already in.
No shit.
But they have less choice because they're a refugee. So again,
that's right.
Why would we 100%. Want to inflict? So why would we want to knowingly inflict that?
Because the alternative appears to be death.
Well, we have to come up with a way of helping refugees that empowers them to continue to live meaningful lives that they want to live. And it's easy to say you can't do it. But it's
easy for rich people to talk about meaningful lives. It's easy. If you're a villager,
I'm not rich. Yeah.
Compared to what? To what? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're a villager, your life is your fields and your family. And if food does not come out of the ground, you starve. Right? The agricultural the conditions for half of the world are what you call 1 acre farmers. 1 acre farmers, they have a patch of land. If they're lucky, they own it. Often they don't. Often they have informal title. They farm that patch of land, and 80-90% of the calories they eat are the calories they grow on their own land. Any surplus they have, they sell for basic.
I'm not questioning any of your theories that led
These are not theories. These are the facts of how half of the world works. Okay. So the idea that
all that stuff isn't what I'm questioning. I'm questioning the motives.
Hang on.
Of the corporations that would be making these investments. They don't care about the refugees, Vinay.
Nobody cares about the refugees. That's why they're becoming refugees. If anybody gave a shit, we wouldn't be driving SUVs. Right? The genocidal process of burning the oil, warming the atmosphere, we don't care about these people's lives. We're in the process of genociding them right now. Our energy system inevitably runs on human blood because these people will inevitably be displaced by the carbon dioxide we're emitting.
There's a way of looking at the whole climate crisis in that way.
You bet. Yes. And if you're brown, it's real easy to see it that way, let me tell you. Right? Well, so let me drive the point home here.
Okay.
My ancestors were peasant farmers, and I don't mean the Indians. The Indians have been university educators for 12 or 1400 years, right? I mean the Scottish side of my family were peasant farmers. They were sheep farmers. They got shoved off their land in Ayrshire 300 years ago. They suffered more under colonialism than the Indian side of my family did by a huge margin, right? So on my mother's side, I come from landless peasantry. I come from people that were made refugees in their own countries. Technically, these days, you would call them IDPs, and they had 300 years of alcoholism and piecework. Right? So half of the world's population just lives by growing their own food on a patch of land they have very, very weak claim on. They move to the cities to get jobs. The cities are incredibly hostile to peasants that arrive with no skills. They get shoved into horrendous factory conditions. They work like slaves, and they produce the standard of living that we all enjoy because they're the people that are doing things like sewing this garment. We're already completely enmeshed in a vast, inhumane machine that crushes the souls out of people and squeezes them into consumer products. The idea that a continuation of that machine is some horrendous new thing, no. We've already got 1 billion people living in conditions similar to the ones that I just described, and I don't see anybody doing a goddamn thing to help those people. Right? It is no worse than what is already happening. If it seems like news, you should not be so surprised. Because compared to the conditions in those peasant agriculture areas when the rain dries up, compared to the conditions of the people that are manufacturing the shit that we see in Walmart every day, compared to the conditions of the people that are living in the slums, compared to the conditions of the people that are crossing the southern border in the US to get away from the drug cartels, this is not a substantially worse deal. It's a continuation of the shit show. I absolutely agree. If I could fix the shit show, I would.
Yeah.
But my God, this is not such a bad offer. You get a place to live, you get access to the global economy, you get a system of justice, and you get plugged into a government in which you actually have some control.
Well, that AI justice stuff is pretty sketchy too. The idea that somehow AI judges that are trained on often biased data would be any less biased. We already have a huge problem with the Bail algorithm software that is often used now across the country.
The problem is
so
not
far,
bias.
technology hasn't been helping a lot in
The problem
justice.
the problem is not bias. The problem is cost. If you can't afford access to a court,
No,
you're screwed.
actually bias is a problem because they're being trained on the
But bias is a problem.
records that are already racist and
If you have
and
no
things like
access to
that.
a court, if you have no access to a court, and you have no access to a judge, you have no rights. And this is the common condition of the peasants. The peasants don't own the land they live on. They can't litigate because they have no titles. This is all the Hernando de Soto stuff, right? Access to justice involves getting access to a court. You need a court that will hear your case. You need the ability to do legal representation. If you can't afford a lawyer, an AI lawyer is better than nothing. If you can't afford to get your case in front of a court, the idea of automating justice, you can beat bias out of a robot.
No,
right?
you can't.
Yes, you can. Because you absolutely
Not if
can.
it's trained on it.
Sure, but what kind of idiot is going to train a third world legal system on first world data?
I don't
Not
know.
me.
The idiots that are training everything else on the biased data, Vinay, you know about this problem as much as I do. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know.
Oh, sure.
You know what
right?
I'm talking
But
about.
this is an American problem, and we're not talking about an American situation, right? We're
not sure
talking about what happens when you get half of the population of India being
Wait, what's an American problem?
The biased data thing is an American problem.
No, it's actually, and all of the systems are all using equally bad training data. Yeah.
If you're dealing,
anyway, I'm just
if you're
saying,
dealing with disputes with Indians on both sides of it, because by the way, the ground zero for climate change is India, right? I'm not building these systems for Africa. I'm not building these systems for South America. The people I expect to be living in these systems are Indians, because we're going to be hit harder by climate change than anybody else. It's already 50 Celsius in Indian cities in summer. We're going to get mashed by this thing. And, under these kind of situations, do we have the ability to get unbiased software? Probably not. Can we get it to be less biased than humans? Almost certainly. Can we statistically measure the bias? For sure. But if you do not get access to courts, you cannot rebuild a civilization. They're critical. And if we can't afford to have a whole bunch of people acting as lawyers and judges, the idea that we would automate that is not just we're going to shove these people into some automated meat grinder. It's that we're going to get them access to justice at a price that even refugees can afford.
No, actually, it does sound like an automated meat grinder to me. That's what that sounds like. Because there's already so many people that don't have the means to hire expensive lawyers and stuff that already get the shaft in our existing legal system.
Absolutely.
And so the idea of just kind of that on steroids, with AI is a very terrifying prospect. Just let the broken parts of the system carry on, and that those people would just be refugees with no rights otherwise. So some rights are better than no rights. I mean, these are two familiar arguments that have been made in the past for fascist movements and things like that. So I understand the realism and the practicality of what you're saying, but I don't think it's something we want to work towards. I think it's
If we
sort of like a
don't
worst
put-
case scenario.
No, but we're already in the worst case scenario. We have 1 billion people constantly hungry in the world right now. We have 20 million people a year dying of poverty.
So if you
We're
were going to
already
start
in.
trying to implement this tomorrow, though,
We're already
So-
in the worst case scenario.
so what would you do? Start trying to move people to the beaches that don't have anybody living
Right?
there
No,
anymore?
right now we're still in the technology development phase, right? So we started giving hexayurts to homeless people on the West Coast. We did a short test run there. It was very successful.
Where was that?
We did it in LA.
Oh, okay.
Partnered with a couple of local groups that were already working with the homeless. They did the risk assessment, decided it was worth doing. They built the hexayurts themselves and they handed them out.
How did it go? I mean,
Very successful, mostly clandestine because people didn't want to stick their heads up and get into trouble with the city. They didn't want to get their funding cancelled. The whole thing.
that's why I was really surprised when you said Los Angeles, because their policies about the homeless are just
crazy,
so
right?
cruel. Yeah. So you did have to do that on the low.
Always has to be, right? I mean,
Okay.
when we tried this in Florida in 2007, the local police came around and burned the refugee camp to the ground the night before the hexayurts went up.
Okay.
Fortunately, nobody died.
Did you say
Right.
Florida?
Yeah.
Why am I not surprised?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So all of this kind of stuff, right? Until the technologies work, we don't do human testing.
Because that sounds like something like what more do you think we could do with hexayurts, or sorry, what do you think we could do with hexayurts here in the United States to help the homeless?
Start living in them, right? I mean, the thing that
I'm not living in a hexayurt.
yeah, you say that now. You say that now, right? But the difference between the hexayurt and every other system like this is that I designed this thing for me to live in. Right?
Uh-huh.
The hexayurt, the critical infrastructure maps, the entire system that I'm describing, right?
Uh-huh.
The candidate user is me. Right? I've designed all of these systems to say, if I was a refugee, what is the minimum that I could use to take care of a family and have a reasonable quality of life? What's the absolute minimum required? Right? But I didn't design this for a mythological us. Right? I didn't design this for a mythological them. I designed personal me. Me and my family. What's the minimum that we would need to survive if we got kicked off our land, if we got made homeless by climate change, if our lives were destroyed by war? What is the absolute minimum set of kit required to get back on our feet and not have our kids die of fucking dysentery?
So a kit, so that's an interesting idea. So these are some things we could like ship them to a location or something too, after something had happened where the people didn't have, I mean, they have to leave because there's no food or water where they are. But if you brought the hexayurt, is there a water, a system for water?
Yes. So
Talk about the hexayurt.
For water, there's a couple of different systems, right? If you've got access to fresh water that you just need to filter, you can use straw filters, like Sawyer filters. If you've got water which is much more contaminated, you would look at reverse osmosis. If you've got seawater, there are a couple of different strategies for desalination. There are things called seawater greenhouses, which work for big things. There are a variety of direct air capture systems, which would work really well on beaches where you just pull the water out of the air. You can also do desalination.
This is built into the hexayurt.
No.
Desalination?
This is the infrastructure package around the hexayurt.
Okay.
The hexayurt just gets you a bare building.
Okay.
Right? Around the bare building, you need the critical infrastructure. You need the water. You need the sanitation. There are 6 things you need, right? So people could be too hot. They can be too cold. They can be hungry. They can be thirsty. They can be ill, or they can be injured. We call these the 6 ways to die. So there's a design language, a pattern language, a methodology called 6 Ways to Die was the old name for it. Then we called it Simple Critical Infrastructure Maps. So it's an 18-point checklist to allow a set of experts to come together and build out the infrastructure template for keeping a group of people alive in a given situation, right? Here's where our refugees are. Here's the water situation. Here's the sanitation situation as it currently stands. Go through the design exercise, workshop out the solutions, figure out what it is you're going to deploy. So we branch back to Materium. Say that somebody has a desalination system. They have a Materium asset passport associated with the desalination system, which carefully and clearly documents all of the technical features of the desalination system and makes legal guarantees about performance. It specifies what the energy is that needs to go in. It specifies what the sizes of the pipes that go out. It specifies how often you have to replace the membranes, right? All of that information is machine readable, right? It starts out as machine readable. Ideally, it's written in a language called sysml and is executable as a simulation of the physical asset.
Yeah, I saw that. You guys use XML and JSON to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very nice. Yeah.
And if you use sysml, that is an actual executable language that's used for things like modeling satellite components. So you start out with sysml models or XML models of all of the different pieces of equipment, and you can then run these things in a simulator to figure out whether that set of tools gives you an effective life support harness for those people. Now, that means over the next 10 or 15 years, we're going to have to build a life support technology simulation environment, right? You start with an abstract model of a human being, this much water in, these many calories in, this temperature range, these are the needs. And then you start building increasingly sophisticated models that show things like how much longer can this person survive in the cold if they have a warm jacket? If they're going to be cooking, how much fuel do they need to cook this food substance over this stove? Over 5, 10, 15 years, you build increasingly sophisticated models. And yes, of course, AI is a part of that, so that we can calculate the absolute best tools to give people to survive. And that becomes sort of like a Wikipedia for global survival. Hey, we got a population in South America, but they're at 12,000 feet of altitude. What equipment do they have? Put that in the simulator, run the machine. Okay, these trucks from these places with the following equipment can reach there in 3 days, and this is the gear load that you need to drop on these people to keep them alive. And
so we need a system that everyone can contribute to.
Yes. Absolutely, right? And the idea is to do something under a kind of Creative Commons style license so that over time we can work up this humanitarian technology simulation environment. And all the legal machinery for making sure that people are telling the truth about physical assets that we're building with Materium is intended to make sure that the information going into that simulator is accurate and legally binding. So if some bastard starts selling equipment with a misleading specification that gets people killed, we can legally crucify them.
Yeah, there'll be the paper trail.
There'll be the paper trail.
The paper trail. Hey,
legally binding promises.
Good question for you from Haley here. She says, Vinay, if AI is theoretically advanced to a point to provide law and justice, what jobs remain for humans to do that AI isn't cheaper and better at doing that will pay a living wage to climate refugees?
So this is the $24 billion question. If AI works, what the hell are human beings for? Right? A lot of people think that the AIs are simply going to purge the human population because they're really, really, really inefficient and because they're also super environmentally destructive. I am not particularly happy about that as an outcome. Here's what I think it boils down to.
As if we were put on Earth to work.
Well, that's the alternative, right? Anybody that has ever farmed for a living knows that the basic option for all human beings is farming, and farming sucks.
Yeah.
Really, my God. When I was a kid, farms in Scotland, I spent a lot of time on farms in Scotland, my God. So the core has to be manufacturing, right? Knowledge work is going to the machines for the vast majority of it. And certainly the refugees don't have the education to be picking up and doing knowledge work. So we're talking about industry. What kind of industry are we talking about? I think it's going to be largely customized manufacturing, right? You decide you want a pretty new suit of clothes, and you say to the AI, hey, draw me pictures of all these fantastic clothes that I want. When you see an outfit that you actually like, you say to the AI, hey, get me that made. The AI then turns that into a set of cut patterns, and somebody with a sewing machine has to then assemble those garments. I think what you're going to get is mass customization with huge amounts of skilled human labor behind the mass customization systems, because it will be cheaper and better to use skilled human labor than robots. Now, if we get a phenomenal breakthrough in robotics that makes skilled human labor doing that kind of manufacturing no longer efficient, then at that point, I think people are genuinely screwed, and God help them.
Well, that's why basic income, there's no reason to put it off, really, because it's easy to see we're going to get to that point at some point.
I'm 100% in favor of basic income.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
right?
Good.
And if we had basic income, you don't need hexayurt refugee camps because all these people can basically build with their basic income. If we got basic income, you don't need any of this stuff.
Well, if a country's washed out, it's hard to distribute their basic income to them, right? The refugees, those kind of refugees.
Global basic income. Right? Basic income should be universal, not within each nation state. It should be a payment to all human beings, regardless of what country they live in.
From where? Where did it come from?
We just tax the global economy. We tax any transaction that's made between two countries. You just grab the money on the wire.
It's like everybody loves the global economy when they can buy their stuff from all over the world, but when it's time to actually then give back, and would there be like a fund that all the companies put into or something?
I mean, basically, the idea that international payments pay a tax to international agencies like the UN, it's inevitable that eventually the UN weans itself off America and winds up making a bid. Like, you get kind of a deal cut between global capital and the United Nations, and global capital basically says, "Hey, look, here's the deal, UN. We will pay you taxes voluntarily if you agree that you're going to regulate us instead of the nation states." So you take the kind of global companies, and the global companies register with the UN. They incorporate at the global level using the UN. They pay taxes to the UN, and they lift themselves above the nation state. I think that's inevitable within the next 50 years.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. We should end it. We've been going for a long time now.
Oh, yeah.
But this is really interesting topics and really, really kind of important life or death shit, that we're talking about here. And
which, by the way, nobody else is talking about, right? Everybody talks about, oh my God, 1 billion climate refugees. I don't see anybody else doing low-level technical planning work for how the hell we're going to keep these people alive.
Yeah, right? And it seems like the one thing that we could all collaborate on too, because it's the one thing that all the different refugee, scenarios have is you've got a bunch of people in one place that you have to get food and shelter to quickly. And I never worried, I used to drink a lot of Soylent, the food substitute that they have a lot of that now. And I when I was a kid, I never wondered, I wondered, we just had protein drinks or whatever. And I thought, well, why don't they just drop protein mix? And as a kid, that's right. But still, we have the, high protein food that we could just drop places. But it's the distribution network. We'd have to give them, food that they would eat depending on what they can eat and stuff like that. But the fact that we're still just sort of depending on some kind of sort of patchwork, with the humanitarian efforts and stuff like that, as if it's all happening for the first time, even though there's so many disasters happening so quickly.
When it actually matters, we make really reliable systems. And when it doesn't matter, we just have whatever bullshit happens on the day.
But it always matters.
But not
right now.
Not to the international community. The international community doesn't give a shit about refugees. They do the bare minimum so they don't get crucified in the press. Other than that, you're on your own.
Well, we're all a part of the international community, aren't we?
Well,
and when you say that, who are you really referring to?
Well, I'm talking about the aid agencies, right? I mean,
oh, okay.
I had aid agencies actively sabotage the hexayurt getting properly formally tested in South America because it was too cheap and it lasted too long, and they were afraid the locals would start manufacturing them themselves.
And why would that be bad?
Because it would cut the aid agencies out of the loop, because the locals could fundraise directly and they could build the shelters locally.
There's plenty of other things for the relief aid things to spend the money on. I'm sure people in hexayurts doesn't mean that they don't need that money.
Nonetheless, from their perspective, the hexayurt was a direct threat to their business model, and they did everything possible to make sure it would not be used.
Well, that's a big problem, isn't it? When when relief organizations are more worried about their business model.
And we're talking about the big brand name agencies. I'm not talking about some rinky-dink operation. I'm talking about the biggest agencies in the world that do humanitarian sheltering. That was their attitude towards innovation. Right? And it's like this all the way through. You know, if you compare the difference in quality between the McDonald's supply chain and the supply chain that's running tents out to the places where you've got refugees, that's the difference between a system that somebody cares about and a system that nobody cares about. You know, if somebody drops a single beef patty in McDonald's, that thing is logged and registered, and somebody has statistics and blah, 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 blah. They've optimized everything down to 50 freaking decimal places. The tents, every time there's a disaster, they start making phone calls. A few weeks later, maybe they get some tents, maybe they don't.
Yeah, and they're losing money too. It's a waste of the money that they're spending on things too, inefficient and stuff. But yeah, I also was happy to talk about it. Even the things that we don't agree on, Vinay, I also can't really, and I'm often the one ending the conversation. You start to talk to people, they're so far, they just, they kind of glaze over. It's almost like when I tried to talk about people about copyright law. They just glaze over.
They just glaze over because you get the point where they're not serious.
And I'm trying to get into like what, because I'm serious.
Yeah, absolutely, you are
trying to do something.
Yeah,
but I have no idea. I mean, you can tell from the conversation, I am totally still in the learning phase. I am ignorant about every single aspect of everything we discussed. Okay,
I gotta say, like,
but all I can do is keep asking. You know,
don't give yourself PTSD by becoming expert in this. Right, the more you learn about climate crisis, the more you learn about refugees.
I don't think I could ever become an expert in this. I don't think there's any danger in that. It's just about trying to get the information and filter it, and then when you find something, getting it to more people. So I feel like we really we talked about a lot of things. It'll be a lot of great clips that can start a lot of great conversations. I want to remind everybody to please subscribe to the Mindplex podcast. This is on the SingularityNET channel, but go subscribe to the Mindplex podcast. And we're also going to have a Mastodon instance launching soon, and so we look forward to everybody using that. And really nice having this lengthy conversation, Vinay, about these really important topics. And your podcast will be out at the end of next week.
Amazing.
And we will, and so talk to you very soon. Thank you so much, Desi. Glad you made it in spirit anyway. And we will have Desi again, and she's around. Oh yeah, and everybody like and subscribe and everything else I'm supposed to say before I say goodbye. We're going to wrap it up. I want to thank our audience who had a really neat discussion going on, and
hang in there, folks.
It's really neat, and you know, just keep the conversation going, everybody. It's nice to have. There are people obviously that do want to think about this stuff and do want to try to get to the bottom of it, and figuring out a way to you know, try to make things better. That's all you can do, or trying to make things better. But like I said, I'm way in the exploratory phase. And to me, I think the point I wanted to make before I got off was that in this conversation alone, I think it's interesting how even for something like Burning Man, when you're trying to make things better just for next year, and you can't get anybody to like take it seriously, it doesn't make me optimistic about people trying to take this other problem, because it's basically this recipe. Burning Man's always been a recipe for disaster, and it's always been a little bit of a miracle that people come back and that everybody's relatively okay, and there's always casualties every year, you know, but it's a lot of people and a lot of crazy people. But I think it's a really good metaphor for not taking these things seriously. You know, if we can't get together and make sure that we're better prepared for something like Burning Man next year, in case it rains a little more than usual, you know, because we don't even know the stuff we're going to be up against yet. And, you know, and Ben always likes to say that, you know, AGI will fix everything and it will help us do it, but we have to program the AGI that's going to help us do it. It still comes back on us, you know, and the human element, you know, is the part that we're trying to imbue. So anyway, thank you very much for coming on the show, and Everybody, we'll see you on the next Pubcast and also the next podcast on the Mindplex channel. Thanks a lot and sweet dreams.
Fabulous.